working in tandem with the international criminal Sidwell. By exposing Cullum's operations and stopping the catastrophic deployment of the cold fusion weapon, Valentin hoped to completely rewrite his standing with the global authorities, transforming himself from a wanted fugitive into a vital international savior. Back in Port Charles, the shockwaves of Jack's secret setup and Valentin's sudden disappearance were already causing a massive relational collapse among the town's core families. Anna Devane, having recently returned to active duty on the WSB board, found herself caught in a furious deadlock with Jason Morgan, who tried desperately to block her from interfering in the unfolding situation on the pier. Jason warned Anna in no uncertain terms that Valentin had painted a massive target on his own back and that anyone trying to shield him would be caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, a stunned Nina Reeves was forced to confront the jaw-dropping reality of the situation after a tense visit to Turning Woods. Nina, who had been secretly manipulating the medical treatment of Jack Brennan to protect her daughter Willow from Sidwell's overreaching influence, learned directly from a rapidly recovering Jack that Carly and Valentin were not only allied, but sleeping together. The revelation left Nina utterly appalled, realizing that Carly had been deliberately trolling her about Jack's medical condition while harboring the world's most wanted Cassadine right in her own home. As the first chapter of this explosive saga reached its peak, every major player in Port Charles stood on the precipice of a massive reckoning. Carly was forced to brace herself for the fallout of a stunning confession she knew she would eventually have to make to her family, knowing that her children, Michael and Jocelyn, would struggle to accept her devotion to a man like Valentin. Jocelyn herself was embroiled in her own dangerous heroic efforts, attempting to turn Sidwell's henchman, Pascal, against his bosses by convincing him that he was entirely expendable to the organization. This brave intervention by the young Jack's woman was destined to catch the direct attention of the mysterious bureau chief C, intertwining her fate with Valentin's global mission. With Jack Brennan's vengeful trap sprung, Valentin's life hanging in the balance, and a trail of deception stretching from the local docks to the highest offices in Geneva, the stage was set for a terrifying journey into the heart of betrayal, where the true identity of the monsters in the shadows was finally coming to light. To see how these tense events visually unfolded during this dramatic era on screen, you can look back at the official ABC network promotions. General Hospital Tease, June 2026. This official network preview captures the high-stakes atmosphere in Port Charles during this specific month of June, highlighting the return of Anna Devane to the board and the escalating tension surrounding the town's key players. The tension lingering over the docks of Port Charles was nothing compared to the emotional firestorm brewing within the walls of Carly Spencer's home. For weeks, the quiet upper rooms of her house had served as an impossible sanctuary for Valentin Cassadine, a man running for his life from the World Security Bureau while simultaneously attempting to dismantle a conspiracy that reached the absolute highest levels of global espionage. The bond that had formed between Carly and Valentin was born out of raw survival, but it had quickly deepened into a searing, undeniable romance that defied every expectation of the town's social elite. They had spent their final hours together trapped in the intoxicating afterglow of their lovemaking, fully aware that the fragile bubble they had created was about to burst. Valentin knew that his remaining time in Port Charles was measured in minutes, not days. The shadow of Ross Cullum, the corrupt and ruthless WSB director who had been pulling the strings from the dark, hung heavily over them. Cullum was on the warpath, desperately searching for Valentin to permanently silence him before his own treasonous actions could be brought to light. As Valentin looked at Carly, the reality of his desperate gamble weighed heavily on his shoulders. He was not merely planning an escape, he was preparing to mount an extraordinary global counteroffensive. His ultimate destination was Geneva, Switzerland, where he intended to walk directly into the lion's den and present a mountain of damning evidence to the enigmatic supreme leader of the Bureau, the powerful figure known only as Z. Valentin's mission was simple yet terrifyingly high stakes. He had to prove that Ross Cullum was a dangerous double agent actively colluding with the international criminal Jens Sidwell to weaponize a highly classified cold fusion prototype. It was a play that carried a devastating risk. Valentin knew that. The air inside the Port Charles harbor had always been thick with the scent of brine, low-grade diesel fuel, and the unspoken secrets of the town's most dangerous players. On this particular evening, the fog rolling off the water was exceptionally heavy, blanketing the docks in a gray shroud that swallowed the dim glow of the overhead streetlights. Down on the pier, the stage was set for a confrontation months in the making, a lethal game of chess where the pieces were moving at a breakneck pace and the stakes were nothing less than survival. Valentin Cassadine stood near the edge of the wooden planks, his dark coat collar turned up against the damp chill, his eyes scanning the misty horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who had spent his entire life running from the shadows. He knew the World Security Bureau was closing in, and he knew that his status as a high-profile fugitive meant his time in Port Charles was rapidly ticking away. Yet, what he had not fully anticipated was the depth of the trap that had been laid for him, a meticulous snare orchestrated by a man he once considered both an ally and a bitter rival in the high-stakes underworld of international espionage. That man was Jack Brennan, the enigmatic and dangerous operative who had spent weeks carefully constructing an elaborate web of deception designed to neutralize Valentin permanently. For the longest time, Jack had played his cards close to his chest, even going so far as to feign a severe medical crisis, pretending to be locked in a vegetative state at the Turning Woods facility to lower everyone's guard. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a performance that allowed Jack to observe the shifting alliances in Port Charles without drawing suspicion to himself. From his supposed sickbed, Jack had watched with simmering fury as his carefully laid plans began to unravel, most notably because of an unexpected and volatile romantic alignment that had taken root right under his nose. Carly Spencer, the fierce and fiercely protective grandmother, mother, and businesswoman, had done the unthinkable by opening her home and her heart to Valentin Cassadine. What started as a transactional arrangement born of mutual necessity and a shared desire to neutralize Brennan had morphed into a sizzling, deeply emotional affair. The secret romance between Carly and Valentin had become the worst-kept hidden truth in the upper echelons of Port Charles, an isolating dynamic that forced Carly to lie to her closest confidants. She had kept the truth hidden from Lulu Spencer, deliberately avoided the razor-sharp intuition of her ex-husband Sonny Corinthos, and left Jason Morgan completely in the dark while he carried out his own dangerous missions. To Carly, Valentin was no longer just the feared, morally complex scion of the Cassadine dynasty, he was the man who had consistently shown up for her when Jack's promises turned out to be nothing but beautifully spun lies. Sitting in the quiet sanctuary of Carly's home, the two had built a fragile, temporary world where the looming threat of the global intelligence community felt miles away. But the illusion of safety was shattered the moment Jack Brennan dropped his infirm facade, rising from his bed with a vengeful fire in his eyes and a singular mission to reclaim his territory and eliminate the man who had stolen the woman he desired. The confrontation on the pier was the culmination of Jack's meticulous counter-strategy, a move that Sonny Corinthos had inadvertently accelerated. Sonny, uncharacteristically calm but deeply calculating, had already engaged in a private dialogue with Laura Collins, leaving the mayor completely unaware that he had actively pushed a vengeful Jack onto Valentin's trail. Sonny's directives to Jason Morgan were clear: if the opportunity presented itself, Jason was to finish the job and eliminate Valentin once and for all, ensuring the Cassadine threat was neutralized for the good of the family. As Jack stepped out of the fog on the pier, his hand resting casually inside his jacket where a weapon was undoubtedly concealed, Valentin did not flinch. The two men stood face to face, a lifetime of shared secrets, betrayed alliances, and mutual respect hanging heavily between them in the cold night air. Jack's voice was smooth, completely devoid of the weakness he had projected at Turning Woods, as he delivered a chilling, final farewell to his rival, making it clear that this encounter was intended to be Valentin's definitive end. Yet, as the tension on the docks reached a boiling point, the narrative complexity of this deadly setup began to reveal its true layers, stretching far beyond a simple turf war or a battle over Carly's affections. Valentin was not a man to walk into an ambush without an ace up his sleeve, and his survival depended entirely on a high-stakes play involving international intelligence and a massive betrayal within the World Security Bureau itself. The true architect of the chaos gripping the intelligence community was not Valentin, but rather a ruthless, rogue operator named Ross Cullum. Cullum had been operating in the shadows, executing a dangerous agenda that involved the kidnapping and torment of Anna Devane, the murder of local assets, and the weaponization of a revolutionary cold fusion prototype that threatened global stability. Valentin knew that his only path to total redemption, and more importantly, a legal pardon that would allow him to build a real future with Carly and his daughter Charlotte, lay in exposing Cullum's treason. To achieve this, Valentin had quietly orchestrated a master plan that required him to flee Port Charles and make a desperate trek across the globe to Geneva, Switzerland. There, in the sterile, high-security offices of the intelligence elite, Valentin intended to present his findings directly to the enigmatic head of the World Security Bureau, a mysterious power player known only as Z. Valentin knew that walking into Z's domain was an extraordinary risk. There was every chance that the bureau chief would simply honor his outstanding warrants and lock him away forever in the brutal confines of Steinmauer prison. But Valentin was willing to gamble everything on the value of his intel, intending to prove that Ross Cullum was a double agent who had been actively working in tandem with the international criminal Sidwell. By exposing Cullum's operations and stopping the catastrophic deployment of the cold fusion weapon, Valentin hoped to completely rewrite his standing with the global authorities, transforming himself from a wanted fugitive into a vital international savior. Back in Port Charles, the shockwaves of Jack's secret setup and Valentin's sudden disappearance were already causing a massive relational collapse among the town's core families. Anna Devane, having recently returned to active duty on the WSB board, found herself caught in a furious deadlock with Jason Morgan, who tried desperately to block her from interfering in the unfolding situation on the pier. Jason warned Anna in no uncertain terms that Valentin had painted a massive target on his own back and that anyone trying to shield him would be caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, a stunned Nina Reeves was forced to confront the jaw-dropping reality of the situation after a tense visit to Turning Woods. Nina, who had been secretly manipulating the medical treatment of Jack Brennan to protect her daughter Willow from Sidwell's overreaching influence, learned directly from a rapidly recovering Jack that Carly and Valentin were not only allied, but sleeping together. The revelation left Nina utterly appalled, realizing that Carly had been deliberately trolling her about Jack's medical condition while harboring the world's most wanted Cassadine right in her own home. As the first chapter of this explosive saga reached its peak, every major player in Port Charles stood on the precipice of a massive reckoning. Carly was forced to brace herself for the fallout of a stunning confession she knew she would eventually have to make to her family, knowing that her children, Michael and Jocelyn, would struggle to accept her devotion to a man like Valentin. Jocelyn herself was embroiled in her own dangerous heroic efforts, attempting to turn Sidwell's henchman, Pascal, against his bosses by convincing him that he was entirely expendable to the organization. This brave intervention by the young Jack's woman was destined to catch the direct attention of the mysterious bureau chief C, intertwining her fate with Valentin's global mission. With Jack Brennan's vengeful trap sprung, Valentin's life hanging in the balance, and a trail of deception stretching from the local docks to the highest offices in Geneva, the stage was set for a terrifying journey into the heart of betrayal, where the true identity of the monsters in the shadows was finally coming to light. To see how these tense events visually unfolded during this dramatic era on screen, you can look back at the official ABC network promotions. General Hospital Tease, June 2026. This official network preview captures the high-stakes atmosphere in Port Charles during this specific month of June, highlighting the return of Anna Devane to the board and the escalating tension surrounding the town's key players. The intricate maze of international espionage and local vendettas in Port Charles grew exponentially more tangled as the direct aftermath of Valentin Cassadine's disappearance sent shockwaves through the highest command structures of the World Security Bureau. For Valentin, the dangerous journey to Geneva, Switzerland, was a desperate gamble against time itself, driven entirely by the need to secure a permanent future free from the constant threat of incarceration. Walking into the sterile, high-security headquarters of the Bureau, Valentin knew that his status as an international fugitive meant he was stepping onto a literal minefield, where a single misstep would find him rotting within the inescapable stone walls of Steinmauer prison. Yet, as he finally stood face to face with the supreme leader of the Bureau, the incredibly elusive and powerful figure known to the global intelligence community only as Z, Valentin did not flinch. He immediately laid out a devastating array of concrete evidence, completely bypassing the standard channels to expose the massive treason of Director Ross Cullum. Valentin presented Z with irrefutable data logs and encrypted communications proving that Cullum was actively functioning as a rogue double agent. He demonstrated how Cullum had systematically sabotaged official operations, orchestrated the terrifying kidnapping of Anna Devane, and aligned himself with the ruthless international criminal Jens Sidwell to weaponize a highly classified cold fusion prototype for catastrophic global distribution. Z listened to the presentation with cold, calculating detachment, weighing Valentin's criminal past against the staggering value of the intelligence he had just delivered. Valentin argued fiercely that his own actions, including his tactical escape from Steinmauer, were entirely necessitated by Cullum's corruption, as remaining within the standard system would have guaranteed his assassination. He made it clear that he was offering Z a clean path to neutralize a massive internal threat before the cold fusion project could destabilize global infrastructure, but in exchange, Valentin demanded a complete, unconditional legal pardon and total immunity for himself and his daughter, Charlotte. While Valentin fought for his freedom in Europe, the situation back in Port Charles had devolved into a state of absolute chaos, with Carly Spencer sitting directly at the center of the brewing storm. Having successfully delayed Ross Cullum and his armed tactical unit just long enough for Valentin to vanish, Carly was left to face the severe domestic fallout of her secret romantic alliance. The bubble of isolation she had carefully maintained shattered completely when she was forced to make a stunning, raw confession to her family and closest allies. Sitting in the living room of her estate, Carly looked into the stunned eyes of Michael and Jocelyn, admitting that she had not only been harboring the world's most wanted Cassadine in her home, but had fallen deeply in love with him. She explained the bitter truth behind her actions, detailing how her discovery of Jack Brennan's horrific manipulation of Jocelyn had driven her to seek vengeance at any cost. Carly wept as she described how Brennan had weaponized Jocelyn's grief over Dex Heller to trick her into executing Cyrus Renault, using that tragedy as blackmail material to drag her innocent daughter into the deadly underbelly of the WSB. The revelation left her children in a state of utter disbelief and deep emotional conflict. Michael was deeply alarmed by the sheer legal jeopardy his mother had placed herself in, realizing that harboring a fugitive of Valentin's stature could carry a decades-long federal prison sentence. Jocelyn, however, was gripped by a complex mixture of intense guilt and fierce protectiveness, realizing that her own secret life as a rookie operative had inadvertently forced her mother into the arms of a dangerous Cassadine patriarch. The family meeting was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of a furious Jason Morgan, who had just learned of Carly's deception from his own intelligence sources. Jason, who had spent months executing high-risk maneuvers under the impression he was protecting Carly from external threats, felt a profound sense of frustration. He confronted Carly with uncharacteristic intensity, warning her that Valentin was a master manipulator who would ultimately look out for his own survival above all else, leaving Carly to take the fall when the Bureau inevitably brought the hammer down. The emotional destruction caused by Carly's confession quickly rippled outward, igniting a dangerous confrontation between Carly and a deeply unhinged Jack Brennan. Brennan, having completely dropped his medical ruse at Turning Woods, arrived at Carly's doorstep under the cover of darkness, his standard rigid composure entirely replaced by a terrifying, volatile mix of heartbreak and absolute humiliation. He aggressively confronted Carly over her betrayal, throwing his discovery of her intimacy with Valentin directly in her face. Brennan, who had spent his entire career in the frozen, untrusting world of espionage, confessed with raw vulnerability that Carly was the only person he had ever truly let into his life. Learning that she had manipulated his genuine affection to orchestrate Valentin's transfer and ultimate escape was a devastating psychological blow. He bitterly warned Carly that her loyalty to a Cassadine would be her ultimate undoing, promising that when the legal trap snapped shut around her, he would not lift a single finger to save her from a federal pit. The danger surrounding the Spencer family reached a critical flashpoint down at the looming estate of Windmere, where Jocelyn Jacks found herself trapped in a lethal game of survival against Jen Sidwell's remaining network. Armed with the knowledge that Cullum and Sidwell considered their local foot soldiers entirely expendable, Jocelyn mounted an incredibly brave, independent heroic effort to dismantle the operation from within. Utilizing her tactical training, she managed to manipulate the estate's electrical grid, triggering a massive power surge that plunged the entire castle into absolute darkness. In the chaotic minutes before the backup generators kicked on, Jocelyn attempted to lead an escape, but the sheer ruthlessness of Sidwell's security apparatus proved too overwhelming, and she was violently recaptured. However, her